Hey guys, pulled out a goofy one to talk about today. This is the Wildey Survivor. It was designed in the early 1970s by a guy named Wildey, and I think nowadays, at least on the internet, it's mostly famous for being featured in the movie Death Wish 3 with Charles Bronson. He uses it to take out a whole crew of street punks that have been terrorizing the city. But apart from the movie, it's actually a pretty innovative and interesting design. It was the first gas-action semi-auto pistol on the market. It came out about 10 years before the Desert Eagle even. And besides the novel gas-action feature of the gun, what was also interesting was that just the sheer amount of customization that was available from the factory. There were all these different barrel lengths, there was a carbine version, there were a bunch of different calibers, different triggers, different sights. So pretty much every gun can be unique in a way. And because of that, there are a few different models out actually with different finishes even. I'll be honest right now, the extent of my knowledge is pretty much found on Wikipedia. I've read a few other articles too, but most of it's just contained in the Wikipedia article. So I would just say, if you're really interested in the history and different variations and models and everything, go on to Wikipedia, search for Wildey, and there's a good article there. So I'll spend most of this video actually just talking about my experience with the gun, because there isn't really anything like that on YouTube that I found. In fact, there's just not a whole lot on the internet really about first-hand experience with these things. This gun happens to be in double action, single action. Single action only was also an option from the factory, but this one is double action, single action. It's in .45 Winchester Magnum, which is kind of an interesting round too. I wish I hadn't shot up all my .45 Win mags, but it's basically a .45 ACP, only longer. It holds 7 rounds in the magazine plus 1 in the chamber. A few different calibers for that. There was also, for this gun, there was also a .475 Wildey Magnum. There were a couple proprietary cartridges. It also ended up shooting .44 Auto Mag, which was introduced in the early 2000s. But I personally think it's great that this one's in .45 Winchester Magnum, because I can actually go to my gun shop and buy a box every now and then when I want to shoot it. .475 Wildey Magnum, it's probably not going to happen. The cartridges are apparently ideal for reloaders though. I think they're just real easy to reload, and another thing that makes it good for reloaders is this unique system right here. It's a gas valve that you can actually adjust for different loads. So you put up a load, you put a load in here, you make your cartridge, you put it in. It doesn't cycle correctly. If you adjust this knob, you can tune it into the specific load. So it's kind of an interesting feature, and I'll talk about that in a little bit when I talk about shooting impressions. But apart from that, the gun is it's pretty well made actually. It's very heavy. I'll give you a size comparison. It's about 67, 68 ounces unloaded. It's all stainless steel, which is the main reason for that. And as usual, I got my Beretta here. So you can see it is a big gun. Feels a little bit more comfortable in the hand than the Desert Eagle that I have also. If you check my videos, you'll see my dad shooting it, the gold tiger stripe Desert Eagle. But it has a nicer grip really than the Desert Eagle in my opinion. It's just a little bit smaller. It's still humongous, but it just doesn't, it's not overwhelming like in the Desert Eagle 50A. You got the slide release right there. This is a safety decocker. The way that works is cock the hammer like you're going to shoot it. You can pull this down, and it decocks the gun, and it also stays down. And what that does is when you pull the trigger, it doesn't go back all the way, and it doesn't go all the way forward to strike the firing pin. Whereas if you were to take the safety off, see it drops forward. Now that it can actually, the hammer can drop all the way and set a round off if there's one in there. Sights are adjustable in the rear, and the front sight is just a iron sight. Apparently another option was to have a white outline, I guess probably on the back sight, on the rear sight, but this doesn't have that. Sight picture is not very good in my opinion. That front sight really disappears when you're shooting at paper. It has a ventilated rib, although it definitely doesn't share the sexy looks of a Colt Python with that rib. Magazine releases on the bottom. Pop that out so you can see what that looks like. Like I said, it holds 7 rounds. Got a plastic follower there. The trigger is also nice and wide, which I like because it makes it comfortable. See if you can see that a little bit. And I mentioned before that you can order this from the factory in half a dozen different barrel lengths and different configurations. You can actually swap the barrels out somewhat easily also. I haven't actually done it and taken the barrel off, but I believe it just takes unscrewing a couple screws here, basic field strip of the gun, and the barrel just comes off. It's a fixed barrel, and then you just put on your new barrel. There's carbine kits, there's all sorts of stuff. Shooting the gun is actually surprisingly pleasant. I was really surprised the first time I took it out. .45 Winchester Magnum didn't kick a whole lot, and you can actually adjust the recoil by using this knob. And that was kind of an interesting experience too. I used a box of, first time I took it out I had a box of Winchester, because that's just what my gun shop had. And first few rounds weren't cycling properly. Slide would go back, but not far enough to chamber the next round. So what I had to do was use this adjustment knob here. And I ended up turning it clockwise. I'm not really sure which direction goes which way, but what it does is it lets more air, when a round goes off, it lets more pressure go out and push this thing here. This is the piston. It actually pushes the slide back. And that's how the recoil system works. It's sort of like half gas and I think half recoil operated, because I think what happens is that it pushes this back and then the slide goes the rest of the way from the force of that. But so what I had to do was adjust this knob until it started working fine, and at that point it actually cycled every round just fine. And what it did is it soaks up the recoil pretty well. I'm not sure what it shoots like in the 475 Wildey, but in 45 Winchester Magnum I was pleasantly surprised with how soft shooting it was. Partially I'm sure it's because it's a 67-ounce gun, but shooting it was actually quite fun. The sights, like I said, were not that great, so it was a bit hard to see what I was shooting. But once I got those dialed into, it was actually surprisingly accurate. One thing I didn't care for too much is the back of this grip is a bit slippery. Let's see if I can show that in any way. But it's sort of, you have a little bit of grip right here, not much though. It's quite slick also, but right here especially, where this magazine release button is, it's just real slick. So when you're holding it, it just always kind of feels like, and the grips too are just purely slick wood, it just kind of feels like it's always going to slip out of your hand. So I didn't care for that a whole lot. I'll show you the trigger. Cocking it's kind of fun too, because the hammer is extremely wide. It's probably at least an inch across, so it feels really nice. But so you cock it, I'll show you the single action trigger is just okay. A little bit of take up there, and it's pretty heavy. A little bit of creep too, and then some over travel also. So really the trigger isn't anything to write home about. The double action trigger is kind of strange too. It feels like nothing I've really ever felt before. You pull it and you just have no idea at all when it's going to break. It's smooth and it's not that heavy really, but it just keeps going back, and then you have no idea when it's actually going to break. See, like right there, I mean usually this trigger stacks a little bit or it stops, but on this thing it just keeps going and then it breaks suddenly. Which I guess isn't a huge thing if you're target shooting, but it is just a little bit strange the first time you feel it. These grip serrations here also are pretty ineffective, just like they are in the back. Just the grip in general is just really slick. See also there's a cutout here so you can pull the magazine out easily. So criticisms about the gun are going to be probably just that it's big and awkward. You know, I said it feels not too bad in the hand, but just the weight balance is actually pretty decent because most of it is above your hand. It's not real front heavy or something like that, but it just feels big for sure. The slipperiness is definitely a knock against it, I think. It never feels like you really have a good solid grip on it. And I can't imagine what would happen if your hands were wet at all. The weird calibers are going to be another knock against it, because this one is probably the most accessible caliber, and that's 45 Winchester Magnum, and that's still not something that you can just walk into any Walmart and find. Imagine the 475 Wildey situation is even more annoying. And finally, another big detractor is definitely that there are no parts support anymore. If this thing breaks, if your Wildey breaks, there's not much you can do about it besides finding a custom gunsmith or something like that. The company, I believe, went out of business in the early 2000s, so you're really just up kind of on your own if something breaks on it. In conclusion, I think the gun is a must-have for anybody that collects Magnum semi-autos, you know, like the Desert Eagle, Auto Mag, things like that. If you don't have a Wildey, you're missing out. It's pretty pleasant to shoot. Trigger's not great, but it's good enough in single action, and it's decently accurate. You know, it's a fixed barrel. Sights, which are fine, they're not amazing, but apart from the slipperiness of it, which kind of makes the handling a little bit annoying, it's actually a pretty decent gun. The cycling thing, it's kind of fun that you can actually customize it so that if your load isn't cycling correctly, turning the knob one way or the other, you'll usually get to fix the problem, and then it starts running reliably. So that's kind of interesting, just the customization possibilities there. As far as cost goes, these usually cost probably about $1,500, maybe $2,000, something like that. They're pretty rare. They're introduced in the 70s. I think, from what I understand, they were made through the 70s and then through the 80s, and then they had a lot of financial problems. Fortunately, that Death Wish 3 movie came out, and from what I've read, every time that movie came on during the 80s and 90s, they'd see a little bit of bump in sales when it came on TV. So I think they finally closed up shop in the early 2000s. Not a whole lot of these were made, so you don't come across them very often. And with all the different configurations, like I said at the beginning of the video, different barrel lengths, different calibers and everything, probably aren't going to come across two Wildeys that are exactly the same. So, you know, it's an interesting gun. I wouldn't say it's my favorite, but I do like shooting it more than the Desert Eagle, for sure. Just more pleasant, you know, because it's not shooting that 50 AE. And also the grip just feels a little better. So yeah, it's the Wildey Survivor. It's a cool gun. Oh, another criticism I just remembered. Racking the slide is pretty tough. It has to go really far back, and the spring is pretty stiff. I'm a big guy and I'm not weak or anything, and it's definitely you got to really try to get the slide back to rack that first round. And this thing is just kind of free floating, which seems a little strange at first, but like I said, this is the part of the gas piston system. And it shoves the slide back, depending on how open this valve is. You turn it, and there's, if you can see it, there's little notches. So pretty weird, but pretty interesting. It was definitely very innovative in the 70s when it came out. Beat the Desert Eagle by several years. So it's a Wildey Survivor. Thanks for watching.